Well, EU defence ministers have been meeting today in Prague, where they've agreed to work on preparing a joint EU mission to train Ukrainian troops. Although numerous training initiatives are already underway, the EU's top diplomat, Josep Borrell, says that the needs are enormous and that the various efforts need to be more closely coordinated. He added that this step needs to be quick and ambitious. Well, let's listen to what Borrell said in Prague earlier on today.
The European Union stands united in support of Ukraine. There are many training initiatives on the way, but the needs are enormous, and we need to ensure the coherence of these efforts. And I can say that all member states agree clearly on that and on launching the work necessary to define the parameters for our EU military assistance missions for the
EU's top diplomat speaking there. Well, let's get some more analysis, and we can speak now to Samuel Ramani, who is an associate fellow at the Royal United Services Institute and tutor of politics and international relations at Oxford University. Thank you so much for being with us here on France 34. What would the scope of such an EU military assistance mission in Ukraine actually be, do you think?
Well, I think it won't necessarily be extending the parameters that much. It'd be more about centralizing the training efforts that we've already seen coming out of the European countries individually and NATO. So what Lithuania has been doing, what Britain has been hosting, the mine clearance initiatives that the Netherlands and Germany have been trying to do, as well as the discussions that the EU has had since the fall. So it will be a centralization of existing training efforts and also add more on the areas of demining and officer training.
So only training, do you think?
Well, I think it'll be training in the use of NATO-class weaponry. That'll certainly be important, particularly as the war drags on. Air defense systems, multiple launch rocket systems that training's already been underway in Poland and Germany. So I think it'll just be mostly about training of the military as well as the use of equipment.
Well, some EU defence ministers sounded quite lukewarm, or rather hesitant, I should say, about this type of initiative. I'm talking about the defence ministers of Austria and Luxembourg, just to name two. Why do you think it is that they're not so enthusiastic about this?
Well, I think that's largely a reflection of divisions in the European Union. If you look at Austria's policy in general, it's been amongst the more dovish states, certainly towards Russia in this context. We even saw Karl Nehammer visit Moscow and talk with Vladimir Putin on a parallel track initiative. And there's been concerns about the Austrian security and intelligence services perhaps going their own route. And Austria is not a member of NATO. So their objections would be kind of understandable and in line with their current policy. And Luxembourg might be just another outlier in that case. I think there will be divisions, but it won't be as pronounced as, let's say, on supplying some of the most lethal arms like fighter jets.
Some analysts are predicting an outcome for Ukraine, a bit like what happened on the Korean Peninsula in the 1950s, a divided country with starkly different ways of life either side of a border. So it's important, isn't it, that the amount of territory that Russia ultimately manages to hang on to should be minimized. And I'm just wondering if this EU military assistance mission isn't ambitious or far-reaching enough. I mean, a deterrent is required, isn't it, for any future Russian ideas about invading sovereign territory?
Well, the main goal, obviously, is to combine training with extensive arms supplies. So more of the American $3 billion arms package, more of what Britain promised when Boris Johnson visited Kiev recently, more even what Dmitry Kuleba was trying to negotiate in Sweden over the past 24 hours, like Archer artillery systems. And even what Germany's been talking about, though it's more delayed to 2023. So that training is paired with the continued supply of arms, then there'll be a deterrent effect. But Ukraine has been warning about the scenario since the very beginning, exactly the North and South Korea scenario, since April, that Russia is going to try to landlock Ukraine on the Black Sea, annex all of Donbass, Kherson, and Crimea, and effectively create, well, one state that's European-oriented, another pro-Russian series of people's republics and annexed territories as probably almost a totalitarian set of regimes.
So just to be clear here, you don't interpret a military assistance mission as being the beginnings of an EU army, so to speak?
No, I don't think it's going to lead to a mission creep into a larger EU army. I mean, Poland came forward with the peacekeepers proposal within the first 2 weeks of the war. That was coming from Morawiecki and the Law and Justice Party, and that was almost universally shot down. So I would say expansive NATO peacekeeping mission or expansive NATO military intervention is about as likely as a no-fly zone. It would probably command support maybe from Poland and from the Baltic states, but probably for very few other countries.
And can I just lastly ask you, what is the state of play? I mean, we've had a stalemate on the battlefield the last few weeks, it would seem. There's this new offensive by the forces loyal to Kyiv in the south of Ukraine to take back control of their territory. What is the state of play at the moment, in your opinion?
Well, it's been a stalemate, certainly, in terms of lack of progress from either side. There's been a lot of moving parts and a lot of things that have been changing. The Russians have been struggling in Donetsk, but they have been continually shelling Kharkiv, Mykolaiv, trying to broaden the scope of the war. The Ukrainians have been allegedly striking in Crimea. So there's been a lot of movement, but neither side is making real progress. What we're seeing now, however, is the undeniable escalation of the Southern Front. First of all, the crisis in the Zaporizhzhia nuclear reactor, and now, over the past 24 hours, Ukraine capturing 4 villages in Kherson and apparently making a broader attack on it. It's still too early to tell whether Ukraine will succeed or whether Ukraine will merely just gain enough ground to isolate existing Russian troops, disrupt Russian supply lines, and prevent Russia from holding a referendum on annexing Kherson, which it was planning to hold as early as next month.
Okay, well, thank you. We're going to have to leave it there. Thank you for your analysis. Samuel Ramani at Oxford University. Thank you so much indeed.